Oh, there's a, oops. Screen share. Oops. Is sent to everyone. Thinks that's fine. Okay. We'll see.
Okay.
I'll check online.
We'll check it out. Let's see. Let's start. Play from start.
It's fine.
Okay. Well, we may just have to look at that. All right. So my name is Jason Morgan, and thank you for having me here tonight. This is maybe my fourth meeting here, so I'm new to this group. So I'm going to ask a few questions. This is going to be dialogue. I'm not really a coder. I'm not a programmer. I'm not going to be showing you how to code tonight. We're going to be talking about the business of healthcare. I'm going to share my experience in working in the healthcare industry. So that's what tonight's topic is about. I'd like to ask you guys a few questions. Questions, that word is going to be a common theme in my presentation tonight. I'd like to first know from you guys, how many of you work in the healthcare industry? Would you say you work in healthcare or with healthcare? Okay. So instead, how many of you don't? Okay, great, wonderful. Okay, fantastic, that's good. How many of you in healthcare ever worked not in the healthcare industry? Of those, okay, so you did spend some time outside the industry. Okay, that's great. I think that's fantastic because I started out in healthcare as a paramedic, and I worked almost my entire career in healthcare, and I didn't realize that pretty much a lot of people in the healthcare industry are the same way. We have no clue how the rest of the ordinary world works except as consumers. And so whenever I spent some time outside of healthcare, I always found it very fascinating because I found that the healthcare world is actually what's sort of the twilight zone of the world. And everything else operates normally. And all this time I thought I was, like, oh, this is how the world works. So that helps me know a little bit more. I want to ask one more question to you guys. Of those of you that are in the healthcare industry, how many of you are in the payer side? That's insurance. Okay. And how many of you are on the provider side? That's hospitals, physicians, the delivery of healthcare. Okay. All right. Fantastic. Of you guys that are not in healthcare, if you don't mind me calling on you, what industry would you say you work in?
Transportation.
Transportation. Okay.
I'm retired.
You're retired. What industry did you work? Congratulations. I aspire to do what you do for a living. What industry did you work in?
I was working in large systems integration projects. What's known as development for the federal government and state.
Okay.
International.
Okay. So government contracting, and it sounds like information technology within that. Okay. And you, sir? Or you're in healthcare. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. All right. Well, that's great. I appreciate you guys sharing that. I'll ask some more questions of the group tonight. Part of the common theme tonight is establishing relationships, establishing dialogues with people who are not in the industry or work in different aspects of the industry. So I worked in the provider side. I haven't really gotten to know payer side. Those are the people who pay for the healthcare. We're the ones who deliver it until just the last few years. So one thing that I wanted to establish that's been very helpful in my career is establishing those relationships and talking to people, and just the fact that you're here makes that difference. It does. You're doing that very thing. Yes.
I guess that's.
Oh, it's not working. Okay.
I guess you can continue speaking while I fix it. Sorry about the interruption.
So while working on the technology, I'm not really a technology, but I don't install technological systems. I just work on them. So I don't know much about how to make computers work here.
Now it should be fun.
That's really impressive. That's sort of like blowing your mind. Okay, that's good. That's promising. Okay, so this is the table of contents for tonight. There's an old saying, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So that I try to follow that. So then that way, if you miss what I said, don't worry, it's coming up again soon. So a little bit about me. You kind of already have gotten the rundown. Tell you a little bit about the business of healthcare, then where the money comes from. If you've worked in healthcare in the provider side or delivery side, you deliver the healthcare, you submit the charge ticket into a basket, and somebody in some other office magically turns that into a paycheck, and you don't know nothing about how that happens. And again, only until the last several years have I realized exactly how that works. And the folks on the patient accounting side feel the same way about the clinical side. They're chaotic. We don't know how they work. We just try and get the money into the hospital and move on. So trying to bridge a little bit of that gap. The encounter life cycle. So the second half is going to dig more into some of the data points. If you're not familiar with the healthcare industry or what some of those data points are, we'll talk a little bit about what those data points are. I know we've talked about that in past meetings. Some taxonomies. I'm sorry, data points you should know about, and some taxonomies. And what is that word? That just means like organization, classification. And then some parting thoughts. Thanks to our sponsors. Lucas already took care of that, but thanks again to Axo Healthcare for sponsoring, and also National Technology Council for hosting. So, all right. So a little bit about me. I told you I started out as a paramedic about 25 years ago. Worked in hospital laboratory after I finished paramedic school, which is a couple of years. I was making more in the lab than I was a paramedic. I looked around when I was a paramedic, and I didn't see anybody who was older than about 40, which is about how old I am now. And I said, well, I got to pick a different career because this is going to have to last more than the next 15, 20 years. So I hopped over into IT. They said, we'll take anybody who has clinical experience. If you know anything about computers, we'll train you. And I jumped into that, and that's what I've been doing ever since, is working first with implementations, and then I got into data. Started working with the military's health system, and then I touched Cerner for the first time in 2001, which is when their flagship product, Millennium, came out. And I've been working with it off and on ever since. If you know anything about the hospital EHR vendor market, Cerner has the second largest market share, Epic's first, Meditech and McKesson and others come in third. So Cerner used to have the big academic institutions in the US about 10, 15 years ago. Epic ate their lunch, so Cerner is now focusing on the mid and small market in the US and the international market for those health systems outside the United States. And of course, as some of you may know, they purchased Siemens. So now they have an even bigger, larger international footprint. Started a health IT company in 2009 until 2013. That was when stimulus was signed. So we created a company that would sell EHRs to physician practices. Had 100 people working for me. The first time I had a C-level title. It was totally in over my head, and it was definitely an exciting experience. It was my MBA, and I don't actually have one, but it was real life experience. And I realized C-level is not for me. That's a lot of work, and I have a much better appreciation for what those guys do. So I went back to consulting, and I focused on staying just small and helping clients and delivering something that's top-notch, top quality, and just keeping my company small and making a living. So that's where I'm at today and who I am. Our interfaces that we build today for Cerner Millennium focus on extracting as much data as possible out of these systems, because the number of data points that extract or captured is an order of magnitude larger. It's exponentially larger than it was 10 years, 20 years ago. And you can't make sense of any of that data if you can't get it out and get it into the systems and analyze it. And so that's been my focus. I used to be contracted to do this by the hour, and it didn't make any sense to keep doing it that way. You just work a ton of hours. The money's all right, but there needs to be more standardization, more availability of that data across the board everywhere, so that people can actually start using it and making sense of it. So I decided to take what I did and turn it into a product. And so that's what we focus on today, as we sell the software extraction engine as a software product, data extraction product as a piece of software from the Cerner system to hospitals. So that it's licensed. We don't get paid if it doesn't work. We're on the hook to make it work every single day. We move gigabytes of data every night for every hospital. They're relying on us so their CFOs can make financial decisions. And that's a pretty exciting place to be, to know that what you do matters in that way. And it goes beyond just making a few bucks. It means whether people get to keep their jobs, or whether they're going to hire or lay off, or whether they're going to close a unit or open a unit, or expand and buy another hospital or not. And that feels very formative, much more so than whether to configure a documentation form to have one more checkbox on it for regulatory reasons. So I'm pretty excited about what we do. So one of the questions that I have that I commonly get is the hospital making or losing money? That's what the CFO wants to know. And the answer is, if it's yes or no, it doesn't matter, then all right, where is it making money? Where is it losing money? I need more precise precision. And so that goes on and on and on. And it's kind of like that little infinite look that we saw here on the screen just a minute ago, where it just sort of went into infinity. That's kind of how those questions and decisions can go. So that's why I focus on questions, because if you focus too much on the data, sometimes you can go off the deep end and you're going down a rabbit hole and you don't know why you're doing it. So always focus on the questions. This is my business perspective, an opportunity focused, or business or opportunity focused, instead of being data point driven, which is fun to do. You can geek out with that. I still have to keep my business and my eye on the prize, stay on the ball. And this is what CFOs are doing too. So these are the questions that I ask myself, and I think these are applicable in doing analysis. First question is do you have a problem I can solve? And there's a few questions loaded right into that one question. Do you have a problem? You have to identify the problem. You have to know what it is and have a name for it. I have to know that you have that problem, and I have to be able to solve it. That's 4 things right there. If you can't get all 4 of those in the first question, you're not going to probably make a business transaction. You need to move on to something else. If the answer to all of that is yes, then will you spend money on it to solve the problem? I'm not going to sell you a product if you're not willing to spend money on it. And I know that sounds a bit, like, well, are you just in it for the money? Well, the answer is yes. I have to run a business. The business is survive on cash. So yes, the answer to that is absolutely yes. Hospitals, I think about my business, hospitals have to do the same thing. They have to make money. Now, we want to know that they serve the community and employ people and improve outcomes and treat the sick and get everybody well. But if they don't make money, they can't do any of those other things. So they have to be able to make money. Next question is, how many others are like you? Are there a lot of other people with the same problem? Because then I can scale the solution and sell more of it. That's good. Same thing in hospital. Are there a lot of other people with the sickness? Are there a lot of other people who have the same problem? Then I can scale it and I can make more money on it. I get efficiencies of scale. And finally, how many others are like me? That's my competitive analysis. Are there lots of other people out there doing it? Because if they are, they're probably doing it cheaper, better than I am, and I probably shouldn't go try and do it unless I've got some magical formula. So I'm not going to go make pizzas. I'm not going to make cars. I'm not going to start an airline. Those are things that other people are doing a lot better than I am, and I don't know anything about it. So I'm not going to try and do that. These are the 4 questions that I tend to ask myself when I see business opportunities, and hospitals do the same thing. They're no different than any other kind of business. And finally, one other little thing that I try to remind myself of is you can't know it all. I run my mouth and talk like I do. I've been a consultant for many years, so that's what I get paid to do, is give you an answer and make it sound like it's the truth and it's worth $150 an hour. But the truth is that you can't know it all. There's just too much to know in healthcare, and it changes all the time. I've been doing this 25 years. I still have a little post-it on my computer that says what a HCFA 1500 is versus UP04. I can't remember that stuff, and I deal with it every single day. It's like, I remember this old story. It was this guy who retired from the personnel department. It's back when they called it personnel. He'd been working over that division for 35 years. And every now and then somebody would come in and ask him to sign something or write his signature on it. And he'd open a drawer every time and then close it. And so finally when he retired, the secretary asked, what is it that you always open that drawer for every time you got to sign something? He said, I have down in there taped the word personnel because I can't remember how to spell it. So the same thing is true in healthcare. You can't possibly know all of it. As soon as you think you know all of it or you've tested your knowledge, it's going to change anyway. So it just changes too often. So that's why I say it's good to make friends. It's good to know what it is that you know, but you need to connect with other people because you're going to rely on them, and they're going to rely on you too. So anyway, that's my perspective. It takes me to the next slide, which is relationships and dialogue. Seek to understand. Questions, questions, questions. The next slide is going to be about questions. Form the question to seek the answers. Forming the question, what is it that we want to know, helps define, well, what is it that we don't know, right? Questions serve a lot of useful roles. I've got a slide here in a second. Next, for those of you who are young in the room, if you wanted some advice from somebody who's in their 40s and midway through their career, get to know your peers, people like yourself. Let's you check up on your progress. Am I advancing? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? How are my peers doing? What are they learning that I'm not learning? And vice versa. Those help you establish relationships with people that you're going to know and work with for at least the next several years, if not the rest of your career. And on more than one occasion, people I have worked with have come to be in hiring positions later. Not next year, maybe 10 years or 15 years. People that have worked for me have been in positions now where they have a decision to purchase a product that I make. How I treated them before as my subordinate, what makes a difference now and whether they might buy from me. So that makes a difference too. So be sure to respect your peers and always offer them something in return, your knowledge. Mentors, those are people who are more experienced than you. These are good people to emulate. For those of you who are more experienced in the room, I'm telling you stuff that you already know. You've learned this through your own professional career. Mentoring is a two-way street. If you're younger and you have a mentor, your mentee gets something out of it too. They're not just doing it for the hell of it or because somebody told them to do it. They get enjoyment out of it. So be sure to bring to the table something that they're going to enjoy. It's okay to ask them, what do you get out of it? I think that's a very fair question to ask in a lot of business situations, is to say, what's in it for you? How can I make it something in there for you? You have to consider both sides, and that gets you a win. And finally, know people in other industries, and I've already told you that. There's a lot of parallels. Healthcare can be very, what I call, self-centered. It tends to think in its own world and doesn't necessarily branch out and pull in from experience from other industries. We've done that as an industry for a long time because we have a lot of things that are unique to our industry. We have a zillion acronyms. I can't remember them all, and they're always changing. And that makes us feel nice and secure, and we've got this jargon, and we know who we are, and we're among our own kind. But it also closes us off to innovation. So knowing other industries, people in other industries can help. Me personally, some of the other industries that I connect with is aviation. I happen to be a pilot. I became a pilot about 3 years ago, but I've been connected with aviation for many years. And there's a lot of redundant things, checklists, concepts that aviation uses that I now use in my business that I've integrated. And people think it's innovation. It's like I just borrowed it from another industry. It's something they've been doing a long time. And there are things that they have borrowed from healthcare. Operating rooms use checklists. Why? Because pilots use checklists. That's how they got it. It wasn't anything that anybody invented, I think, personally. Manufacturing, they know all about service and quality. They've got to make it consistent every single time and squeeze every last dollar out of it and make it consistent so the consumer has a great experience. Retail and service industries, same thing, only their product is not something you can necessarily touch. It's all about the exchange. Healthcare is a service business primarily. We move a lot of product, but it's primarily service. So there's a lot we can learn there on consumer satisfaction. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of talking, and I'm going to start asking you guys some questions, and I want you guys to ask some questions as well. So this is meant to be participative. Like I said, I don't know it all, so if you ask a question, I'm going to tell you I don't know, or I'm going to ask among you guys and see what you know. Hopefully you can make some connections in the room tonight with some people that you might not have talked to before. Questions aren't just for getting information. They identify what's unknown, what you don't know, what you want to know. And maybe what you want to know is something else. As you start to answer the question, you can change the question. Analysis is very question-oriented. When you do all the work to finally get the answer, sometimes it tells you you got to go back and change the question. Questions facilitate discussion. If I say, hey, how do we make more money in the 4 North Nursing Med-Surg unit? Somebody will say, wait a minute, I thought we were here to make sure that the sick get better. Well, that means that person's not on the same page as where you were thinking. It may be that you can get together on the same page, but you got to say it out loud. Okay, we're here to make it better, but we also have to make money so that we can save business and get to collaborate and get on the same page. They communicate that you seek to understand. If you're asking the question, then that means I want to know the answer. It isn't just me saying, here is the answer. It's me saying, I'm open to it. My mind is open to that information. So now I'm going to get into the questions. I've been talking for about 20 minutes now, or 15 minutes now. So one of the questions I want to ask you guys is, why are you here? And I'm not going to call on people, but I'm open. But if you have an answer, just jump in there and say it. Why are you here? What's something that you want to gain? If you could get anything you want out here besides some free pizza, what would you like to get out of coming to these meetings? Anybody?
I want to learn something new.
You want to learn something new? Fantastic. That's great. Wonderful. Anybody else? Yes?
Open myself to new ideas.
Open yourself to new ideas. That's fantastic. And let me ask you guys, have you learned something new or gotten new ideas from these meetings?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Good. Yes?
I think we're at this interesting confluence of healthcare and technology right now, and I just want to learn about that confluence of where that's going, where the trend's going. I feel like we're in the early innings, very early on in that stage right now.
So confluence of changes in the industry, and there's opportunity.
Yeah, and consumerization of it, and so it's like going from 1.0 to now 2.0. That looks like.
And is that? Do you guys think that's? What do you guys think of that? What's some other thoughts? Do you guys agree that we're in a point where there's a lot of opportunity for consumerization and change, or do you feel like it's more of the same and not changing?
I think it's changing slowly, slower than I'd like it to. I noticed kind of coming from telecom over to this industry that healthcare kind of moves slower. It has a lot of aspirations, but especially from the consumer side, in some other industries, they have a direct line to the consumer to make changes. In healthcare, you have so many intermediaries, and you have HIPAA constraints and privacy and a lot of legal constraints. So
absolutely.
Just slower.
So, and one of the challenges in healthcare is thinking as a professional and thinking as a consumer. I think about, I want healthcare to change like this, but as a professional, it's a different story. So I think it's an interesting viewpoint that you make. It moves slower, and there are a lot of intermediaries. Do you have a follow thought? Or?
Oh, I was just going to say, we have a lot of conversations about what our consumer strategy should be. My company has 30 different products in different payer segments and provider segments and intermediaries. So when some of them are consumer related, it becomes a question of, how far can we go with that, and should we invest there further? Or who's really going to be the innovator in the consumer space? How much consumers really adopt this?
Right. I think that's a valid point. I've seen something similar, is that consumers want a lot of change and they want new things, but then they aren't necessarily ready to buy it or pay for it yet. And consumerization ties into that. Going back to the original question, some of the original questions is, do you have a problem I can solve? Well, if you're healthy, you don't feel like you've got a problem. So you might be willing to pay for it, even if you'll get the benefit of that later in your life. Any other thoughts before I jump next? Yes, sir.
It's my first time here tonight, and when the Meetup meeting announcement showed up, it was one of those things where, oh yeah, I'd love to find the intersection between data and the healthcare industry. Specifically, right now, when we're still straddling the edge between pay for. It's time to get to pay for performance, right? That's where we're at. We don't get paid for hospital-acquired infections anymore, right? So how can we find and mine the data we already have in our Cerner Millennium systems and find out where we see patterns to uncover how to A, care for patients better, but also keep them out of the hospital instead of getting infections, and then get paid quicker. I mean, it all has to fit together in order for us to make this thing work. Because, if we can get the government to just pick a pathway and go down it, right? That's the big deal. Pay for performance makes a lot of sense if we can get past this upended way to get paid for healthcare. It's just. And the secret lies in the data somewhere, and that's what I was hoping to at least start that exploration tonight to figure that out.
Absolutely. So yes, sir.
I'm working like with police traffic crash data. So like as Jim mentioned, when we are looking for patterns in the hidden part of the data, because sometimes there are information live there, but we are not aware of it just because we are not looking at the right angle. So one of my intentions is to just get like inspiration from other domains which are working in a different area, how they look at the data, so I can kind of like get some ideas for how I explore my own data in our field.
That's fantastic. That's to my point earlier, which is thank you. Is that there are things that we can learn from other industries and apply, and healthcare is no exception to innovation. We're, as a country, we're fantastically great at innovating clinical technology. That's like new drugs, new procedures, new medical devices. But we're not that great at operational innovation in the United States. We just aren't, because we've got a lot of regulation. We've got a lot of industries that make money by being part of the solution and the problem at the same time. As a consultant, I'll say I'm like a lawyer, you know, and if you think about like what a lawyer does, they should be advocating for you, and that's good, but they don't make as much money if the conflict ends like that. So, we have a natural conflict of saying, well, do I allow the problem to continue and maybe refine it more before I'm ready for it to end? And that has been going on for so long in the United States, for decades, that it can't simply be unearthed overnight. And we see that parallel also in other industries. We see it in the food industry, in the tobacco industry. We see it, other industries that typically have a lot more not conflict, but difference of opinion. Guns is a good example. You know, should we have them or shouldn't we? Is it a right or is it protection? And imagine if you're a gun manufacturer and you go, I really don't have anything to say about the political discussion, but I need to keep my sales up. So, you know, what side do you take? So it becomes difficult as a professional on which side do you take, or should you even take a side? And I try not to take a side. I just try to say, what are the rules going to be next year, and move forward and contribute what I can. So very interesting points. Love to continue the conversation. I will have to finish the rest of my presentation. So I get excited about this, as you can tell. Last question is what do your customers want? So if you're in a role in an organization and you do have a role to fulfill, what do your internal customers want? What does your boss want? What are you being asked to do? It helps to take it a step further and say, what is it, how is what I do contributing to the big picture? How does it make a difference in the organization? If you work for yourself or you're an independent contractor, what do your customers do with your product? How are they using it? How do they consume it? It's not just the one thing that you do. Where is it 2 or 3 steps down the road? Okay, so the business of healthcare. Hospitals, if you're not familiar, a lot of you are in health delivery, or what I would call health delivery, health provider. I'm probably not going to tell you anything you don't already know, but at least it spurs on the conversation. Hospitals are like airports, borrowing from aviation. It's a facility, a building, it's like an arena that the local area typically pays for or paid for a long time ago, and it serves the community. You don't decide, most people don't decide right now that I'm going to go see my doctor, so I'm going to fly to Seattle and go see my doctor. I'm going to fly to Seattle and go on vacation, but if I need to see a doctor, I'm going to see somebody locally. So hospitals and their physicians that work for them are very geographically based. Even if you're traveling somewhere, if you get sick there, you're going to see a doctor there. You're not going to get back on a plane and go somewhere else to see a doctor. You typically want it right where you're at.
You might, if actually I had appendicitis in Cleveland. I just presented at the Cleveland Clinic this solution. That night I had appendicitis, and I said, you know what, I don't want to be in the hospital for 3 days in Cleveland. Got on a plane, flew home, went straight to St. Thomas.
With appendicitis?
With appendicitis.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I was like, because I was there by myself, I'm like, my wife and kids, like, that's one of the situations where, defying logic and talking about doctors, she's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't. I was like, yeah, but I don't want to be by myself for, 3 or 4 days, so.
That's a fascinating perspective. I would never have thought of it as, I need to get there now because I don't want to get it here.
Yeah.
And how that plays into consumer decisions. 20 years ago, it would have been, I call an ambulance and they take me wherever. I didn't know which hospital to go to.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. Well, that's an exception to the rule,
Yeah,
I would say.
I would not recommend that. Yeah, it wasn't the most comfortable flight.
I can imagine. Did you buy first class?
No, it's not best, so, yeah. We're
Okay.
all first class.
Middle seats? Okay, well, hospitals are like airports or stadiums. They're highly geographically focused. When people want healthcare, they want it right now, especially the more emergent it is. Again, this is an exception. It's a fascinating data point that I would want to want to go find out, like how many people are getting emergent care versus non-emergent somewhere else from their home for it. They're geographically based and they serve the community. They typically are funded by the community many years ago. The typical amortization schedule on a hospital facility will be 30 to 50 years. That's normal. What's fascinating is that we don't know how we're going to get paid as an industry 3 years from now. So how do you create an amortization schedule on commit to loan pay? That's like us mortgaging for a house, but not knowing if you're going to have a job in 2 years. And I think we all know we're probably going to have a job, but we don't like to think about like, well, what would I do if that happened? Would I move? Would I sell my house? Same is true for hospitals, but they're dealing with buildings that are 100 million or more. With the community's money, our money, right? It's our tax money. So hospitals are a very tricky business to balance. They're not, they're not Nordstrom. They're not, hey, here's our product. We're going to need great service. Please buy it. They have to serve many different customer groups. Airports need airlines, or else they have no purpose of being there. They're just a big, long strip of concrete in the ground. Airlines need airports. They don't have anywhere to land their airplanes. Hospitals are the same way, but instead of airlines, they have physicians. Physicians admit patients, and they discharge patients. Hospitals cannot do anything on their own without physicians. And physicians can't do too many advanced things without a hospital. They need nursing care, they need ICUs, they need operating rooms. Those are just too expensive for physicians, even if they group together to purchase and buy on their own. Some hospitals are jointly owned by physicians, in fact. We see that. There's a lot of different models out there. Lots of different customer groups. Physicians are the main one. Employees are another. Employers, the community, insurance, local suppliers. There's a dozen different major constituent groups that play a part in hospital operations and business, and they all have to be considered. I'm looking at Christine, and she's at Vanderbilt. I'm on a Vanderbilt council, one of many there. I'm just on one. They have me. And we have to consider those things. And it's just fascinating, the types of things that we have to consider. And Vanderbilt is a completely different business model than, say, a hospital out in McMinnville. McMinnville is there to serve that community. Vanderbilt is a national presence in publishing knowledge, which Christine's producing. So it's two completely different business models, and yet they still have the same fundamental business metrics and difficulties. Finally, we get to the profit versus nonprofit. What are the concepts there? Which is better? And we don't like to think of profiting from healthcare in the United States. We think, I don't want to make money off of your sickness. But that happens every day. Drug companies do it. Everybody does it. It's a fact of life. It's just something that we as Americans don't particularly like to think about, especially because our society is very capitalistic. We think about making money and profiting, but just not in healthcare. But there is an upside to for-profit hospitals, which is that if they don't make a profit, then they're just like any other business. They're going to turn over their management. Somebody's going to get fired, right, high up. So for-profit hospitals have actually been studied from time to time. I don't have anything to show you, but there have been some studies to prove that for-profit hospitals deliver better service and better outcomes because they're monetarily incentivized. And we see that in all the other industries in the United States, except for government. Retail, you make money, you get a raise, you get more money, right? And you do more, you keep getting better, right? So it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. But then on the other hand, we don't necessarily say, well, that's not really something right. TriStar hospitals in the Nashville area are all HCA owned. And HCA is a for-profit corporation. They're publicly traded, they have been off and on company. You can buy their stock. You could say, I want to profit from how well you're doing. Most other hospitals in the United States are not. Yes, sir?
How do they adjust for patient populations?
How do they adjust for what?
For-profit hospitals treat different patient populations than safety net hospitals. How do they adjust for that?
I have no idea. That's a great question. Does anybody know the answer to that? How does a for-profit hospital adjust?
It's pretty typical for hospitals, kind of Asian maybe on the populations they serve. I even say we were at like Curling Hospital in Virginia. they're big into GI, because there's a lot of limestone in the rock, the land. And so it's especially that they'll encourage to have, a certain level of degree. So based upon their knowledge of the people population they serve, they will and if they don't compete, then they won't survive.
Sorry, when I say safety net hospitals, I mean like if you get shot in the city, you're gonna go to one hospital. And if you're
Also for
you might go to a different hospital.
My comments too work for the for-profit side of that.
Okay.
Where safety net necessarily have a choice, and they're dependent upon CMS funds or donations from that standpoint.
That's a great question. So safety net, who in here, the safety net hospital, who in here knows could define a safety net hospital? I'm curious. I mean, like, I think I know what it is, but.
There are parts of Tennessee where it's very rural and there's just not enough population base around to support the hospital. And then to his point earlier, it's either rely on government funding or donations, or the hospital folds, or they merge the hospital into another.
Right, okay. So it's a hospital that is supported to be there for geographic reasons. Otherwise, you would have to travel too far for the next closest hospital. So they may not be able to run as a profitability. They have to simply be open all of the time. So that ties into the first question, which is, well, not the first one, but the last one there, which neighborhoods are poor? HCA has had a history of purchasing hospitals in small communities and making that more profitable by making them refers into the major metro areas, and that can work. We see that in other industries. That's common. Airlines do it. They have smaller commuter airlines that feed into a major hub, and then they take you on to where you're going to go. Even if you turn around and take a small airline back to another small town. Or do you build your hospitals in maybe neighborhoods where there's better insurance coverage and people who have the ability to pay? Everybody wants to be in that neighborhood, right? But maybe the service level is way out the top, or they expect you to have top-notch specialists and everything. That's very expensive. So it's a difficult decision. It's the same thing that retailers face, or brick and mortar type stores. Let's go back up to the top one there. Those who can pay versus those who can't. Do we focus on those who can pay, or do we focus on those who can't and then get reimbursement through, say, indigent programs, Medicaid, potentially at the increase of taxes or more government burden, which then redistributes to everybody? Where would you build a hospital? Healthcare during the encounter versus before and after. This gets into pay for performance and value-based care, which, because you said your company is working on bundle payments and looking at the overall, paying you to stay, paying insurance companies paying hospitals to keep you well as opposed to paying to treat you when you're sick. If we pay to treat you when you're sick, then we're going to focus on your healthcare just during the encounter. I don't care what happens to you before and after. Go smoke your cigarette so you can come back. But when you're here, you're going to have great care. We're going to take top notch. We're going to feed you low-fat food and everything, right? Whereas more value-based care looks at the continuum of your healthcare, not just while you're in the hospital or at the doctor's office. But there's so much less within your control if you run a hospital when those patients leave your hospital and possibly move, go to other hospitals, don't live healthy lifestyles. Maybe there's just so many more things beyond your control. It would be like asking American Airlines to be responsible for your happiness on your vacation that they're transporting you to. Maybe you bought the vacation package through American Airlines vacation department, but they just booked the hotel and the car for you. They can't ensure that you'll necessarily be happy and enjoy the vacation. This is a whole new concept that I haven't found the parallel for. How you make sure that somebody is healthy throughout their life. Yeah. Thank you.
Talking about now the bundle payment access to care, and then the physicians, how can I guarantee after I discharge the patient where they want them to, and they are free to go wherever they want, and then they are free to eat whatever food they like, and then they got sick or whatever, and then now you hold me accountable for all that? No way, it's so difficult. I mean, so there is a resistance to all these bundle payment concept as well, especially from the hospital side, because they are the index. They are the index and so just starting point. And then you are held accountable for the next 90 days. 90 days can happen a lot of things.
Absolutely.
And they cannot have control control over like what happened when patients go to a skilled nursing facility and got infections there. Right? So
Yeah.
and then when the patients got infected and come back, readmission, then the hospital got dead. So it is so tough on hospital. It's one of the also challenges to the hospital and like who, when, what, and where, and also the regulation. Regulation is a big piece kind of like over the burden hospitals too as well. Yeah, so, and
Yeah, that's a big area for us. I would say that the interesting thing is there is a lot of resistance. And it is difficult for physicians, absolutely difficult, but within a market, if you're doing knee and hip replacements, and you have a competitor that has figured that out, they have figured out how to, have that ongoing dialogue with the patient. Maybe they have a concierge person that calls them every several days and figures out. If somebody figures it out and has higher quality and lower costs, then the payers are really influenced to say, oh, I want to contract with that person. Give them more business, they have a lower episode cost and better quality. But there's a long way to go in getting the analytics all figured out. They are really comfortable with those metrics.
I think a lot of hospitals see that today now we're talking about like expanding beyond like so should we find that hometown, should we find that almost like you expand your core business to the downstream, and which is like I don't know, it's very risky because it's not your core business. Right? Yeah, but you will want to have this like vertical integration. To make sure that 90 days wherever they go, and just like you said, the airline industry probably needs to find a hotel and the vacation because we're so happy to make sure that the customer is happy during their vacation. So almost like that we talk about, I think lots of like conversation. At the very beginning, it's not 90 days. The episodes of care is 30 days. And then I hear some suggestions. Okay, we discharge patients to a hotel, and they keep them happy there. Yeah. And then we send a nurse there, 30 days, and then done. You see, it's so all these weird like ideas.
But
So this is another challenge to the pay for performance as well, pay for quality as well, because hospital is so unique. I mean, healthcare is so unique, and even though it's a service industry, but it's very different from other service industries.
But it's
This is a really good slide.
It's a different, if you're a provider, the fact that the burden has been pushed to you to ensure that somebody's healthy, it in and of itself is convoluted, because why does that person want to be healthy? And now it's on a PCP to say, hey, every time you come in, you got to jump on the scale, you got to measure your BMI, because I have a quality score that I get compensated on of that, right? Now you're factoring in denominators and numerators, and you get to a certain point, but it's MIPS, it's MACRA, it's HEDIS, it's HCC, that all these different things are supposed to improve the quality, but it's to speak to what happens when they leave, it's getting pushed to the provider network, hospitals, everything else, that the payers, they're like, hey, listen, you know what? A way to do this is we want you to have skin in the game as well. Beyond that aspect, if you can manage this conical case to say that you're going to be able to decrease, keep some money left over after all the expenses are paid, hey, that's a benefit to you. But again, think about this, is that my contract is with Blue Cross Blue Shield, but yet, in a sense, by my assigning that benefit to all these providers I work with, they're conducting this on my behalf. My contractual obligation is only with that payer, and it's when you really stand back and look at the cycle, you're like, wow, hang on, we're provider-patient is this one dynamic, and yet our interactions with the payer isn't really from that, hey, I paid, I get a benefit. Right. I mean, it's from a contract, if you just want to be contractual and be a lawyer about it, it's like, this seems a little weird, right? If you tried to cast this into airlines or whatever, it's a weird dynamic to begin with.
When I think about the before or after care, and I think about it solely from a financial perspective, like who has the most financial interest in me being healthy before and after my hospital visit? It's not necessarily my physician, like it's my insurance company. And I've seen like my mom has a Medicare Advantage plan, and they offer someone to come to their house and talk to her for like 2 hours to talk to her about her health and what medicine she's on and what she's looking forward to the next year and all these things, completely for free, because they want somebody to be on top of and for her to be thinking about her medical aid. And I've seen that also with former employers' insurance kind of plans. And I mean, we can all talk about, healthcare being nice and about being, for wellness and all that. But at the end of the day, it's about money.
Well, yeah, I agree with the data points that by sending that proactive interface is like, hey, our cost of this interaction, whatever that would be for that home, however, where the caregiver would be, is much less than your mother going through a time frame to where it elevates to an emergent care situation. Maybe you walk in the emergency room, it's 15 grand or whatever. Like, yeah, we'll throw a couple $100 every few months. And we talk about the data science aspect of it. I mean, there's so much that we talk about. You went to the slide and I go, I'll walk in somewhere and I sell to these different providers and everything else, and they say, I want to use machine learning. I want to use AI. I'm like, what question do you want to ask? Right? I don't know. And isn't that the issue? Is like, what do you want to know? And I can tell you if we can get that from the data, but they don't know. This is fear of missing out that has become so, like, you can look at the Google search trend is like through the roof around machine learning and healthcare. And, we've got so much data, but what do you do with it?
Yeah. And if we come to insights from it, there's a nice to know, it tells us nothing. Above that, it tells us something, but then we can't make sense of it.
What are you gonna do?
Then it tells us something and we can make sense of it, but then then do you have the ability to control it? Is it within your purview to do it or your capabilities? It could be that, I think as a pilot, I read these accident stories. The NTSB goes and does all this research, but then sometimes it'll say it was pilot error. Now the NTSB does a great job of investigations, but sometimes it just sums down to it was pilot error and that's all we know. And I go, why am I getting the blame? Was it really me as the pilot, or maybe it wasn't mechanical, but maybe it was just an unforeseen situation. We don't know. So sometimes the data can lead us to a conclusion and say, yep, it was this problem. We knew that. The plane skidded off the runway because it was icy. Okay, but is there anything that the pilot could have done at the time other than not land? No. Make sure it didn't crash into a ball of flames. That's kind of all you can do sometimes. So yeah, it does take you to the next step, but sometimes it necessarily putting that burden on the provider to make it better isn't necessarily, they can't make us live forever, and perfectly healthy. So sometimes it's beyond their control. So that's a fair view, hospitals or physicians. Oh, you had something to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, your analogy about hospitals being like airports, except that it's a place you don't want to go to. So
I don't want to go to the airport either.
I would be stuck in an connection or whatever to this one, but that's it's a different consumer experience. Yeah. And I used to work for a PM, and you're taking a pill, whether it's you're going to a doctor, it's like doing something so that something bad will happen to you. And it's a non-linear process whereby over time, now your condition is deteriorating, and it's like, whoops, now I've got diabetes for the rest of my life. And so then it's like, we will send home health nurses to your house so that you will not get into the hospital. Or we will send you to these outpatient clinics so that you will not, because that's where the consumer costs. So it's, consumers don't yet have enough skin in the game to offset the skin in the game that providers are feeling. Yeah. So I'm on the payer side now, and we're trying to convince them that, your consumers your members need to have more skin in the game. Because providers are going to get hosed. You're going to get hosed. So you don't spread this risk around. We're all going to be in some shape. But that's where I think we could do a better job speaking to the fact that healthcare is not disease care. And really, as a hospital, hospital systems in particular, we need to sort of really get at that a little bit more. Because I do think that people are really want to hear that, and hospitals are doing what they can to address that issue. It's a really unique customer experience.
It is. It's a place you're right. You electively go to an airport, but hopefully, but you don't want to go to hospital. Maybe the hospital's more like a prison, or jail, Some people have gone to jail briefly, some people go for a long time or for intermediate amounts of time. Hopefully none of us go there. But jails too jails and prisons are also built with taxpayer money, funded by, our taxes, and deals with the societal, issue, or challenge. So I don't know. That's a very fascinating way to look at it. That's a good point. All right. Well, we could probably talk about this for a while, but these are some of the unique challenges that CFOs, C-levels face inside of provider organizations. Of okay, yeah, we make money, but okay, how should we make that money? Are we Southwest? Are we American? Are we Nordstrom? Are we Walmart? Are we high-end, low-end, boutique, to serve the masses? Safety net hospitals is one of the aspects versus, academic institutions like Vanderbilt, and then everything in between. I go back to what is the organization's mission. I sell a software product to hospitals, but I look up all my clients' mission statements because that is what's ultimately going to guide the C-suite. When the C-suite has to get together, and it's not frequent, but when they do, and when they're working separately, that's what guides them. That's what they're evaluated on for the most part. When they have to make big decisions and they go, well, which solution should I analyze? Which vendor should I entertain? It's going to be the ones that most closely align with their mission statement. And some of my clients are one hospital in the middle of nowhere clients or county hospitals, and they definitely serve a community. Vanderbilt's on the other end of the spectrum is an academic institution, a national leader. Its mission statement is different than some of my other clients. And they've actually, I've had the VP of, patient accounting, or financial services say, help us with this challenge. How can you help us? And I'll say, well, we got to go back to your mission statement. And it's like not the CFO, but the VP. It's like they've never seen it. And never have I been more exposed to Vanderbilt's mission statement and the 5 pillars as I have in my participation there. And it's made a huge difference. It's helped guide me. And I found that it will help guide you in your job and with your clients. Is what that mission statement is. And it sounds very vague and broad, but I tell you, it'll help give you clarity sometimes. This is one of the slides, other things that, especially I tell this to people who aren't familiar with healthcare is, they say, well, hospitals and doctors make all the money. They're so rich. And I go, they're not really. Their margins are razor thin. Most of them lose money. And it's not because they don't make a lot of revenue. It's just that they're usually not great at managing their business, or their business is too unpredictable. It's unlike any other business. There's a lot of regulation and things beyond their control that interfere with their business, so they can't plan. So who makes the money in healthcare? Everybody who serves the hospitals and providers. I'm in that group too. I'm over there consulting in IT, I guess. Suppliers, insurance, medical device, pharma, those are all for-profit companies. So those are the ones that make the real money in the industry. Not that hospitals and doctors don't make money, but if we think that we don't have a for-profit healthcare system, we're woefully misguided. We do. It just goes to most of the vendors. All right, so now I'm going to cover about where the money comes from. And I could fill you with a whole bunch of statistics, but I think we all know how to use Google, and you can Google it. And, I'll just tell you some broad stroke type stuff. If you're not familiar. Government is the biggest single payer in the United States. They cover Medicare and the military. Those two combined, you've got over 50% of the healthcare in the United States being paid for. Of course, Medicare and military are vastly different payers, so we tend to think of them separately. But Medicare covers everybody who's 65 and older in the United States. If you got a green card or U.S. citizen, you're covered. It's 100% paid for by the federal government. States have no involvement. States can say we will or won't participate in Medicare, and that has no effect. If you in the United States or in any territories, you have Medicare. There's 4 parts: parts A, B, C, D. We don't hear. We've heard of Part D a lot. Part D is a prescription drug plan. The reason it's called D is because it was the 4th one to come. And it came a lot later than A, B, and C did. Part A is hospital, institutional coverage. Part B is professional physician fee coverage. So there's Part A, means hospital. Part B means physician, or what we call professional. And you'll find that being very common in hospital billing or medical billing is there's professional and there's institutional, or Part B and Part A. Don't worry, I have a slide that lists all that together, so you know, like if I say A or institutional or part, whatever, it's all the same thing. There's slight differences, but it doesn't. Part C is Medicaid, and something else called Medicare Advantage, or MA. MA used to mean Medicaid, but now MA tends to mean Medicare Advantage, which is something completely different. So Part C is Medicaid. It's a federal statute that authorizes Medicaid. I'll get to that here in the next point. And then this new, that's been around a very long time, but the new thing that's been up and coming the last 10, 15, 20 years has been something called Medicare Advantage. And that's where if you are 65 or older and you qualify for Medicare, you can elect to take the money that the government would spend on your Medicare Part A and B coverage and give it to an insurance company, and you'll be covered as if you are just an ordinary, covered person like you're working a job. And that can include a lot of other benefits that A and B don't have, including your prescription coverage, which is a whole other thing. So Medicare Advantage is becoming much more popular because it hands off the kinds of actuarial and coverage details to insurance companies, which are much more experienced in administering that. Government is much slower to accommodate to that. So the government likes this idea of going to Medicare Advantage. It's become much more popular. That's why in October, you see all these billboards and advertisements going, it's open enrollment, it's open enrollment, it's open enrollment. You can sign up for this Medicare plan, blah, blah, blah. Those are all the insurance companies advertising their Medicare plans.
So is that sort of like a bundle payment to the insurance companies then?
Yes.
And they'll say, we'll manage this patient probably, hopefully better quality, but at a cheaper cost and profit and keep the difference.
It's a way for the government, the federal government, or I'm going to say CMS because I don't want to just say the federal government, right? CMS to manage their costs. If you have Part A and B, or A is by far the much more expensive program than B. So if you go into the hospital and you stay there for 4 weeks and you're on Part A, the federal CMS has to cover your entire claim, that expense. If the government can say, if CMS can say, hey, here's $800 for the month or $500 for the month for this person, and it's on the insurance company to cover it, just like it is for everything else, all the commercial plans, that cuts the government's losses, and it forces the insurance company to be on the hook and manage it better. And they can also be more consumer oriented toward
with more people, the insurance company can negotiate better rates too with the hospital or the provider.
Exactly, it opens up their base that they can negotiate for.
So that actuaries really crunch the numbers there.
Oh, yeah. Insurance companies long got armies of actuaries.
The actuaries are guys driving the nicest cars in the parking lot.
Yeah.
They get it right, they're great. If they get it wrong, they're gone.
That's right.
They're the odds makers.
That's right. That's right. Casinos employ actuaries. How they come up with those numbers.
If you ever go to an insurance company and it's like, you go to the parking lot and you see like Aston Martins, Lotus, it's the actuaries that they make. Like I said, you're good, you make millions.
They have time to make sure the numbers are right.
Yeah.
They can do it again. Part C is Medicaid and Medicare Advantage. So if you elect Medicare Advantage as a recipient, you elect it for the year, an open enrollment before December 31st, and then you're on that for the year, for the calendar year. So you don't get Part A or B, you get Medicare Advantage. If you don't get that, you get A or B. If you don't enroll at all, you get nothing, and you're really screwed. So that's bad. That does happen. Medicare is funded entirely by 2.9% of all of our income. Self-employed, it's the portion of your FICA. If you are only ever been an employee and you're not familiar with taxes, you only pay half. Your employer pays the other half. Whatever your paycheck is, if it's under $120,000, $150,000 a year, you can add another 7.5% to it, and that's what you actually cost your employer in taxes.
You do.
What's that?
You pay 100%.
Self-employed pays 100%. That's right. I know. I see both sides of it. I have to pay both sides, so it's double. My FICA is double self-employed, which hurts. It's very painful. So that's how it gets paid for. And what's amazing is even though healthcare in total, remember, healthcare industry includes commercial and everything else, but healthcare in general is 17, 18% of our GDP, and only 3% of our income goes to pay for Medicare. That number doesn't sound right. It probably should be like 10% or something. I don't know. It sounds like a losing proposition to me. And if you make over 200,000, another 1% slapped on top of it. But that's still a long way to go, I think. person. Medicaid is authorized by a federal statute, the same one that created Medicare. However, it says the federal government will pay 90% of it, the cost, and the state, and each state will determine their Medicaid program, what they will or won't cover, and there's minimum criteria that people they have to cover. But then they can expand that at their will. Whatever that program is that they establish, the federal government will pay 90% of it, and the state will pay 10. So the state only pays 10 cents on every dollar of Medicaid. The TennCare, 90% of that is paid by the federal government. Only 10% comes out of the 10 cent state budget. So you go from state to state, and you see that they have different programs. Massachusetts, when I was young and a professional, I was working for a company, and they had medical benefits. But they said, if you didn't have medical benefits, Massachusetts Medicaid program would cover me. I was a single guy with no kids. I just made under $50,000, I automatically qualify. And you know, in Tennessee, forget it, that doesn't exist. So it varies from state to state. So some programs, some states will have more Medicaid participation, others have less based on the criteria. Indigent, that is like the homeless, the people who just have no insurance, obviously no job, no place, they don't live anywhere. You're never going to collect from them. And that's typically paid out of the state and local government funds. And that's entirely separate from Medicare and Medicaid. Hospitals will try and get that person onto Medicaid if they can. But if they can't, that person not participating or cooperative, then it eventually goes to bad debt. And that's eventually covered by indigent funds by the local community. And that'll vary by hospital. Some hospitals get no indigent funds. For-profits don't get any indigent funds, as far as I know.
The two worst words are Medicaid and
yes.
Something.
I see a lot of that in my work. Forget it.
Yeah.
Might as well write it off.
Yeah.
They don't get any indigent funds. Does that mean an indigent person can't go to a for-profit hospital, or for-profit hospital doesn't get reimbursed?
No, there is a federal statute called EMTALA, E-M-T-A-L-A, and it's that thing that requires them to have that plaque on the wall. You go to the emergency room that says if you're in labor or in acute distress, they have to see you. But once they have seen you and evaluated you and have stabilized you if you truly are in critical condition, then once they've done that, they reserve the right to transfer you. And then that they may do that or they may keep you. It just depends on their local policy.
But they go through, they have to, even within a for-profit, they go through all this analysis around the cost of care provided to this subpopulation. And they, in essence, petition, or maybe it's the right word, whatever, they send that into the government, and the government kind of says, yeah, you know, here's what you get against that. So within the hospital, you know, HCA has groups, you know, LifePoint, whoever, that literally go through there looking at how much care do we give away, in a sense, and they try to get some recapture of that back.
And hospitals have fixed location, so they would have done that analysis before. What's more likely is the population around them changes over the years. Military, so if you're active military, then your family too, your spouse, your children, can receive health care as a benefit of your service. Certain people who are discharged and meet certain criteria can continue to participate, or if you're in reserve, there's different rules for that. But they can walk into a military facility, hospital, or doctor's office and receive their care. They just show their ID. And that's not, there's no claims, none of that's all internally handled because the militaries actually provide the services. However, they can also walk into a doctor's office or a local hospital, wherever they are, and some choose to simply get their health care elsewhere. Then they are covered by what's called TRICARE, and TRICARE is the military's insurance that you would file a claim if you're a physician or hospital against TRICARE, they would pay it for military, active duty military. It used to be called CHAMPUS. So if you've seen that term, it's the same thing, just changed. It's just like it used to be HCFA and now it's CMS. And I always thought CMS is weird because it's really CMMS, but it's just called CMS. And then veterans, veterans is that you've been honorably discharged and you were injured in the line of duty or you had some sort of injury connected to that, you can receive care through the VA hospitals. And it's a whole separate system under the Department of Veterans Affairs, not connected to the military. So that's all the government payers in the United States, and that's over half in the United States of the money that pays for healthcare. Here's the other big giant chunk, commercial. If you don't know the history, Blue Cross started as the first insurance back in the 1950s, and Blue Cross was coverage for what we would call Part A now. It's coverage for hospital care. And back then, you would go see your doctor whenever you got sick, and he would just charge you, $50, and that was it. So nobody really thought of physician, insurance. It was really just hospitalization, or what we would call it today, catastrophic. So Blue Cross started, and it started out as an employer benefit. They sold their coverages to large employers because if you owned a car factory and your employees got sick, who you trained and invested in, you wanted them to be well and come back to work. So
You
it
got
was
a tax
employer benefit. What's that?
And you got a tax
write-off. That's right. You could attract better talent. That's how it all started. And then over time, as physicians got more specialized and got more expensive, and then there became more kinds of physicians and surgeons and so on. People started living longer, technology improved. And now it wasn't, oh, you have a heart attack, and maybe you're in the hospital and then you're dead. It's, oh, you have a heart attack and you survive, and then you need to see specialists and take medications, and maybe you get a stent and you do all these things. And you live a long time and you're really expensive. So healthcare, insurance progressed. So Blue Shield came along, and they said, we're going to do the same thing, but for physician fees. So Blue Shield is coverage for physician fees. Nowadays, we just call it Blue Cross, and it's all combined. They stopped doing splitting it. You used to have to buy two separate insurance policies, but that ended decades ago. Then there's the commercial. So Blue Cross and Blue Shield is unique in each state, and then they are licensee of the Blue Cross Blue Shield of America network, which is just really a brand umbrella. Each one has to operate independently on its own books. They can't call upon the parent and be like, oh, we ran out of money. It doesn't work like that. What's that?
Boy, do they.
Yeah, they do. The Blues are the largest commercial insurer in the United States. They have the most lives covered. In some states, they're not called Blue Cross. They might be called Anthem. And what's that? Yep. They've started using other names, and it used to be that, say, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee or BCPST here in Tennessee is the dominant insurer. Anthem is the Blue Cross of Illinois, but they also cover other states. So they're like a multi-state insurance company, and they have to meet each state's insurance requirements, but they're one company. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee is just Tennessee. So you may go to Louisiana, and they have Blue Cross Blue Shield of Louisiana, but not every state will have a Blue Cross and call it something else. And next is Aetna, Cigna, Humana, United. Those are the major carriers, commercial carriers in the United States. They primarily attract employers, large employer groups. They do sell individual policies, but mostly they're going after employers. There's some other companies out there too, but those are the big ones. Self-insured, large employers can buy their insurance from an insurance company, or they can do what's called self-insured. They pile up enough money of their own, and then they're their own actuary. They'll outsource the administration of their plans and everything to usually an insurance company because they have the infrastructure. But ultimately, that self-insured employer pays out all their own claims. And hopefully they make a buck in the end and return. And the idea is that it's nonprofit, returns it back to its own employees of the company. And then that gets lower premiums. If you're an employer where you've got really healthy employees, you're going to be wanting self-insured if you're large enough. You have to meet certain actuarial requirements. It's usually on like school boards. I think Vanderbilt is self-insured, that sort of thing. You're not going to, I can't be self-insured. I'd have to have $1 million. I'm not there yet. So, and finally, individual coverage. Okay, individual coverage. That's only come about because of the ACA. You could buy them, but there's some underwriting and there are lots of exclusions. So it wasn't attractive. Now you can get individual coverage. It's still expensive, and there's a lot of things that it doesn't really cover. So it's still preferable to have an employer-based plan if you can, or what we call small mid-sized or large. There's other kinds of coverages. Auto, you get an auto accident, Geico, whoever has to pay your medical bills. Workers' comp, you're hurt on the job, that's a whole separate insurance. Indemnity, this is the old kind of insurance that you could barely find anymore. Nobody really wants to do it. That's where you show up at the hospital, they send you a bill, and you send it to the insurance company and they pay it. That just doesn't exist anymore. It's like less than 1% of it. That's how it used to be done. And then finally, cash. You can always pay cash. Don't pay cash. It's so expensive. Here's some facts and figures, some facts and questions. Hospitals receive 30 to 40% of what they charge, at least my clients. So if they charge you $100, they charge everybody $100 for the same thing. They really only average about 30 to 40 bucks for that $100 charge. That's why when you see those astronomical bills, you're like, who pays this? well, insurance companies negotiated a discount on your behalf. So that's what they actually wind up getting. This varies by the type of patient, demographic, encounter, insurance, etc. But for the most part, it's 30–40%. Worst case scenario is not to have any insurance. And here's why. Let's say you go to the doctor and you have no insurance, and he says, well, my fee is $200. You owe him $200. There's no more to it. Nobody's going to advocate for you. You can't say, well, that's too expensive. It's too late. I already saw you. It's like going to McDonald's and eating a meal, and they're like, wait a minute, I don't want to pay all that. I want to pay half. So
There's one big difference.
yes.
You go to McDonald's, you can say, how much is this hamburger going to cost?
Yes.
You go to a hospital and you say, how much is this going to cost? They don't know.
They can't even tell you.
They can't.
Yeah.
But after a McDonald's business, then you also get the $200 doctor visit.
Right.
Or you go to the mechanic and you get a bill from the mechanic, and then you get a bill from the mechanic supervisor. Yeah.
Right. These are great parallels to how like it would work in the real world if we applied the. No. It's not. So consumerism, as you were mentioning, isn't just making more consumer choice, but also more transparency to consumers so they can see what they're buying and what they're getting. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd also like to say that I know certain nonprofit hospitals, maybe even safety net hospitals, some of them are provided a tax benefit to serve the community. So I think some of them write off some of the compensated care
Yes.
through the care that they can receive funds from people who are in those situations where they can't. They come in there, they say, I have no insurance, I can't pay for this. I think they'll try to, the hospital will do their best to recoup that money, but if they can't, at least I think they have that, I don't know, they can write that off as a community benefit that they're providing.
They can.
Yeah.
I would say that the collections rate, so that is whatever insurance didn't pay and you're liable for as the patient, the collections rate is about 30%. It varies. It can be as little as 10. It can be as much as 50 or 60. But that's of what's left to go. Not the original, of the 30–40% that they collect, that's how much they get out of collections. If they don't get it in collections, if it goes to bad debt or charitable care, the benefit they get is about 1 to 3%. So it's so far down that it's not like, oh, well, they'll get, most of the money. No, they won't. They really won't. So hospitals try really hard to keep the bill higher up, not the amount, but in the tiers of payers higher up before they let it settle down to lower, to let it go to collections. I mean, let it go to indigent, let it go to bad debt. Because at that point, it's kind of like, it's just an administrative task at that point. This is some more questions. We're out of time, so and I've only gotten halfway through the presentation. But these are great conversations. One of the things that I wanted to tell everybody is,
can you go through those data stuff?
What's that?
Can you go through the data stuff because the topic is data? But
yeah.
Well, it's 7:15, so we usually wrap about this time. Yeah, do you have a few minutes to stick around?
I'm happy to stick around as long as we have the space and anybody wants to stay.
Yeah, we have the room until like 7:30.
Well, let me jump to that section then. But before we do, is there anything that we want to say before anybody has to go?
No, I was just going to thank you for coming, and that's it. We have the room until 7:30, so we really do have to be out of here in probably about 10 minutes or so, kind of wrapping up and closing down. So
then I'll fly through the rest of the slides. We stop doing the discussion. I can touch some on some of the data points if that works for you guys.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm happy to send this slide deck to anybody who wants it. And if you have follow-up questions, I can just email me.
It's going to be available.
Yeah, you
Don't worry about it.
If I go through the slides, just slide to the end and then pause. Okay, so let's talk about the encounter life cycle. So now we're going to start getting into more of the data points. If you're not familiar with what's called an encounter or an episode or a visit, they all mean all the same thing. It's a single event of care where a practitioner or a physician is responsible for your care. They figure out what's wrong with you, they treat you, and then they discharge you from your care. It's a legal responsibility and duty that they have that spans a particular period of time. For inpatients, it's the moment you're admitted. to the moment you're discharged. Both require a physician's order. For a doctor's visit, it's from the time you're in the clinic. And then they have an ongoing responsibility for you while you're not at the clinic, should your condition worsen and you seek care from them again. So an encounter is a single doctor visit at an office, or it's a single inpatient admission into the hospital. There's if you're classified as an inpatient, in other words, you stay overnight at a hospital for more than 24 hours, 72 in certain cases, then you're considered an inpatient. Otherwise, if you don't meet that criteria, you're considered an outpatient. And it's a different set of rules between inpatient and outpatient. So that classification is very important for billing. Are you inpatient? If you are, then you're in the inpatient bucket. Otherwise, if you don't meet that criteria, you're outpatient. If you're an outpatient, there's 4 subclassifications: emergency, observation, recurring, and if not any of those, then finally it's generically outpatient. Emergency observation cases get special billing rules, so we subclassify those outpatient encounters. These are the 2 kinds of billing. So any one encounter can have one or both, depending on whether you had services from the hospital, you had services from a physician, or both. If you had service from multiple physicians, you may get multiple bills from physicians. Part A, this is the slide I was telling you about. Part A is what we call institutional / technical / hospital. All those terms get thrown around. They all mean the same thing. It's Medicare Part A, if you're talking about Medicare. It's billed per encounter. So if Part A really only applies for the most part when you're inpatient. It can apply in some outpatient situations. There's exceptions to everything, but for the most part, it's inpatient. You only get to file 1 claim per encounter, per visit. It uses a claim form called a UB04, or the electronic form is an 837I. For professional, you send 1 claim per physician per day of service. You can have multiple days of service for the same physician on a claim, but you have to have separate claims for each physician that cared for that patient. So an outpatient office visit will typically just be a professional claim only for that 1 physician for that 1 day. If you have an inpatient stay, you'll have a claim, institutional claim, and then you'll have 1 Part B claim for every physician that saw you throughout your stay at the hospital. Radiologists and admitting physicians, anesthetists, surgeons, everybody. Yes?
Is this where you get into ICD-10 codes and diagnosis codes?
Yes. All claims require procedures and diagnoses on them, and that's where those codes come in. Because they say, that's kind of like your menu order. What did you order and why did you want it?
And then just follow the billing folks are kind of going through the patient record and looking at all the different coding, essentially what services will perform on that patient.
Great segue. This is the encounter life cycle, and that's exactly what they do. So it starts with scheduling. Hey, I would like to see a doctor. And then they pre-register you, where they capture your name and all that information before you show up. They get your insurance information. Eligibility checks to make sure you didn't lie. Your coverage is actually valid for when you want to see the doctor, and that they'll get paid for it and how much. So they do that pre-work. Of course, anything's subject to change, so that's just checking to make sure you got coverage. They admit when you show up, you diagnose and treat, stuff happens during your visit, whether it's one office visit or an admission stay. Finally, you discharge. That's when you leave the hospital. That could be days later. Meanwhile, your bill has been accumulating. There are no payments during that time. Nobody gets any payments. Insurance or healthcare is unusual in that when the services are rendered today, they probably don't get paid for at least another 30 to 90 days. Maybe longer if there's multiple insurances. That's a long time to carry, say, let's say you have a $100,000 inpatient bill. There's at least $30,000, $40,000 of internal costs sitting on that. Multiple times, multiple patients every single day. That's a lot of float of cash that the hospital has to keep. So they are required to have certain reserves, just like insurance companies. So they continue to provide services. Coding happens after your discharge. That's where somebody, as you were saying, goes through the visit, determines everything that went wrong with you, it happened to you. They put all those codes, and then that goes into a claims and billing. And then finally, they get remittance, they get paid. Yes, sir?
I think the coding can affect the treatment as well. I don't think they'll give you a treatment if they can't figure it out.
No, they'll still, yeah. No, they can deny you before you get admitted if you aren't eligible. Only if it's not emergent.
I mean, if you go in and you ask for some procedure and it's not covered by the insurance.
Well, that'd be a pre-op, so.
Yeah,
in a lot of
right,
cases, yeah.
yeah, so you gotta get stuff pre-authorized before the.
On certain insurance plans, you have to get pre-authorizations for certain procedures.
Yes. So we, maybe it's not the COVID part.
Yeah, that's not.
Eligibility is when authorizations come in. You could think of it as saying eligibility and authorizations.
Yeah, but your eligibility is before the diagnosis.
You would see a physician to determine what your problem is, and then they would refer you for a treatment. These are data points on an encounter that are common. So I'm just going to read them off here. Identifier, that's whatever numbering they use for that. The arrival date time, the admit date time, the discharge date time. Encounter type, that's where are you inpatient or outpatient? What kind of outpatient are you? Which facility, hospital, who's your admitting provider? Where did you come from? Where did you go when you left? Did you come in by ambulance or not? All these are different data points. Diagnoses, groupers, and procedures. These are all these data points. Are we out of time? Do we have to go?
Yeah, it's 25 after.
Okay. Thank you, guys. We'll do more another day, another night.
Just a reminder, we hold these on the third Tuesday of the month, so just consider that we're going to have one any of those third Tuesdays, and just keep checking the calendar. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I'll be kind of replying. Hey, Jason, I had a question for you.
Yeah, hold on. Let me stop the broadcast here.